South Korea really seems unaware of its own limitations. On November 14, Russian media reported that South Korean Defense Minister Shin Won-sik not only reiterated the threat to end the North Korean regime but also vaguely threatened China and Russia. Shin Won-sik stated that South Korea would retaliate against any country supporting North Korea after an inter-Korean war. The main countries supporting North Korea in case of renewed conflict would primarily be China and Russia. Clearly, the South Korean defense minister's words were aimed at China and Russia, especially emphasizing China. If a war breaks out on the Korean peninsula, it directly impacts China's national security due to its geographical proximity. In 1950, China participated in such a conflict, and now it would likely support North Korea, especially given the Sino-North Korean Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation, and Mutual Assistance, which mandates full Chinese support if North Korea is attacked. However, these threats from the South Korean defense minister won't yield any influence. The crux isn't whether China would aid North Korea, as there's little room for debate on that. The real issue is that South Korea seems to be preparing for a new Korean War. Otherwise, why would the defense minister make such statements? Considering the joint US-South Korea exercises targeting Kim Jong-un, it leads to speculative thoughts. In this video, we'll discuss recent political developments in South Korea and cover the following: South Korea's intentions, US intentions, South Korea provoking China, meddling in China's internal affairs. So, the inevitable question arises: what does South Korea aim to achieve? The answer is crystal clear: South Korea is indeed preparing for a new Korean War. Why? The reason is straightforward: it's under the guidance of the United States. On one hand, President Suk-yeol is someone propped up by the US government, markedly different from the previous administration under Moon Jae-in. To be blunt, Suk-yeol, to some extent, is a puppet with no clear governing agenda. On the other hand, after the Israel-Palestine conflict erupted, the Suk-yeol government got scared and hastily engaged in military drills against North Korea in conjunction with the US. In an extremely apprehensive state, whatever the US dictates, South Korea follows suit. Hence, exercises simulating the decapitation of North Korean leadership and warnings aimed at China ensued. So, what does the US aim for here? They intend to gradually stoke tensions between North and South Korea, eventually instigating a war at an opportune moment. The US's objective in inciting war on the Korean peninsula is to avoid direct conflict with China while disrupting China's security environment, thereby stimulating capital outflow from China to the US. This is what the US means by destabilizing China's security environment through such statements. This reckless move by the US and South Korea is perilous because, given the capabilities of the South Korean military, they're fundamentally incapable of confronting North Korea's military might. If conflict erupts on the Korean peninsula, without US intervention, South Korea would likely lose. If the US intervenes, China is bound to step in, leading to global chaos. South Korea needs to be more cautious, or it risks being annihilated. Similarly, the US needs to exercise caution to avoid losing its influence in the Western Pacific. South Korea provoking China, an ignorant gamble. Han Fizi once said something very famous: a small state, while not behaving humbly, and having little power yet not fearing the strong, lacking etiquette and disrespecting a larger neighbor, being greedy and reckless in its alliances, is bound to perish. For a smaller nation, handling relationships with larger ones requires extreme caution because of the vast disparity in resources and comprehensive national strength. Once strategic conflicts become irreconcilable, a slight adjustment by the larger nation can overwhelm the smaller one, leading to significant losses or even the smaller nation's demise. Throughout history, examples of nations perishing due to not behaving humbly, not fearing the strong, disrespecting larger neighbors, and recklessly seeking alliances are abundant. Presently, the most typical case is Ukraine. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Ukraine acquired a significant amount of nuclear weapons, military equipment, industrial resources, aircraft carriers, etc. However, under Western influence, they either dismantled or sold these assets, aiming to align more closely with the West and oppose Russia. The outcome is evident to all: Ukraine has fallen into disarray, steadily heading towards its demise, with an uncertain future. Since President Yoon Suk-yeol took office, South Korea has also trodden this path. On one hand, politically aligning entirely with the United States and geopolitically collaborating to suppress North Korea under the guise of containing China. On the other hand, forming a Quad alliance with the US in the semiconductor field to suppress and restrain China. This stance is extremely precarious. With this alignment, if tensions escalate between China and the US, South Korea stands no chance to act as a buffer and would inevitably become the forefront in the power struggle between these major nations. It could even lead to the risk of the nation's demise. However, objectively speaking, China, if it can help it, does not wish for renewed conflict on the Korean peninsula. This situation is severely detrimental to China's national security and economic interests. From a national security standpoint, a war on China's doorstep naturally poses a threat to its security. Economically, the US has always sought to incite wars around China's periphery because it lacks the absolute means to entirely avoid the risk of conflict with China. Nonetheless, the US continues its efforts, while China endeavors to avert such scenarios. A prime example of this is the US conducting military exercises to provoke North Korea, while China actively facilitated a meeting between the foreign ministers of China, Japan, and South Korea. However, the South Korean government seems oblivious to this fact, which might lead them to suffer substantial losses. Yet, South Korea's risk-taking isn't limited to this. They're attempting to meddle in the most sensitive issues of the US-China rivalry, which could plunge the country into systemic risks. President Yoon Suk-yeol's recent actions and statements exhibit a blatant disregard for the sensitive nature of these issues. After the Apex summit meeting between the US and China's leaders and subsequent meetings between Chinese and Japanese leaders, Yoon Suk-yeol seemingly had the misconception that he, too, could request a meeting with the Chinese leader. Consequently, South Korea applied for a meeting with China's leader, only to be politely declined by the Chinese side. This incident likely left Yoon Suk-yeol disgruntled, prompting frequent statements on China-related issues upon returning from the APEC summit and even more provocative comments during a recent interview before his visit to the UK. In the interview, Yoon Suk-yeol criticized the normal cooperation between China, Russia, and North Korea, absurdly suggesting that their trilateral cooperation might damage China's international image. Who China chooses to cooperate with does not require South Korea's unwarranted interference. Moreover, he further exacerbated tensions by making statements about the South China Sea and Taiwan issues, asserting that the South China Sea, Taiwan Strait, and Korean Peninsula issues are security risks in the Indo-Pacific region. He emphasized the need to safeguard peace and stability in the South China Sea and Taiwan Strait, defining maritime order. China's foreign ministry spokesperson, Mao Ning, refuted Yoon Suk-yeol's overstepping comments. Mao Ning stated that China is fully aware of its responsibilities and interests. It doesn't need guidance on what to do or not to do. The Taiwan issue is China's internal affair, and no external force is permitted to intervene. Regarding the South China Sea, China and ASEAN countries are capable of managing it, and South Korea, not being a party directly involved, has no need to join in the fray. Yet, despite China's warning, the Yoon Suk-yeol government didn't restrain itself. After facing criticism from China, he persisted in criticizing China during his meeting with the UK Prime Minister. During the South Korean president's visit to the UK, a 2+2 dialogue mechanism between their foreign and defense ministers will be established, enhancing the armed forces' cooperative capabilities through bilateral exercises. It's evident that South Korea is being influenced by the US, further involving the UK in the peninsula, akin to what Japan did, thereby providing local support for potential future interference in Peninsula and even South China Sea affairs. Moreover, while signing the Downing Street Agreement with the UK, South Korea mentioned China, emphasizing the importance of peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait for international security and prosperity. Both nations strongly opposed any unilateral actions attempting to change regional status quo, and declared their joint commitment to maintaining freedom of navigation and overflight in the East and South China Seas. The agreement additionally underscored that the UK and South Korea's fundamental stance regarding Taiwan remains unchanged. On one hand, they emphasized their unchanged stance on Taiwan, while on the other, they cast aspersions on China. This is risky for South Korea because interfering in the internal affairs of a major power like China isn't acceptable. In the game between major powers, it's best for smaller countries to stay far away. Otherwise, once things go awry, it spells big trouble. This is the end of this video. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment. We genuinely appreciate your support.